In September of 1620, during the reign of King James I, a group of around 100 English men and women, many of them members of the English separatist church, later known to history as the Pilgrims, set sail for the New World aboard the Mayflower. 2 months later, the three-masted merchant ship landed on the shores of Cape Cod in present-day Massachusetts. In late December, the Mayflower anchored at Plymouth Rock, where the Pilgrims formed the first permanent settlement of Europeans in New England. Though more than half of the original settlers died during the grueling first winter, the survivors were able to secure peace treaties with neighboring Native American tribes and built a largely self-sufficient economy within 5 years. Plymouth was the first colonial settlement in New England. In the beginning of the 17th century, at the time of the first contact with the English, a Native American confederacy called the Wampanoag lived in southeastern Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Their population numbered in the thousands due to the richness of the environment and their cultivation of corn, beans, and squash. From 1615 to 1619, the Wampanoag suffered an epidemic long suspected to be smallpox. It caused a high fatality rate and nearly destroyed the society. Researchers say that the losses from the epidemic were so large that English colonists were more easily able to found their settlements in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in later years. In 1620, the Wampanoag High Chief Massasoit made a peace treaty with the Pilgrims, who had landed in that tribe's territory. The treaty was observed until Massasoit's death. It was through this assistance that the Plymouth colony avoided starvation during the early years. Okay, so I'm here outside what would be called a Mayflower II. This is the Wampanoag village outside of Plimouth Plantation, and it's a good place to start this tour. You cannot talk about the story of the Pilgrims without talking about the native people that lived here first. So when you come to Plimouth Plantation, the first thing you should do is begin with a tour of the Wampanoag village. And they have traditional houses and the village, and it gives you a good idea of what the native people, live like. When the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, there was an existing society that many people forget. The Wampanoag people who lived here before, and especially in this area, they were decimated by diseases before the Pilgrims arrived. But there was an existing society. And the story of this English colonization of New England is the story of a clash of cultures. We have the new people showing up, the English, and we have the indigenous people that have lived here already. So we have a very different way of life between the two groups. So now I'm here at the English village at Plimouth Plantation, and you can see here the difference between the cultures, that clash of culture beginning immediately in 1620. So I'm going to take you now through the main street of this village, and you can see the difference between the English culture and the Wampanoags, who are the local tribe around here. So it's very interesting to see the differences. Plymouth Plantation, a living recreation of the Pilgrims' first settlement set in 1627, is one of the country's great historic attractions. Costumed interpreters, each representing an actual pilgrim, reenact their lives in this astonishing setting. Visitors feel transported back in time to 17th century Plymouth as they interact with characters in this ongoing live drama. The Pilgrims community is as accurate as research can make it. Accounts of the original Pilgrim colony were combined with old records, archaeological research, and the history written by the Pilgrim leader William Bradford. When the Pilgrims arrived in 1620, they brought with them several technological advantages that the Native Americans did not have. For example, metal. You can see here bits of armor. These are helmets. They would also have had breastplates. Metal in general. They would have metal things like plates and cups and dinnerware, that kind of stuff. Also weapons made out of metal. For example, swords, knives, hatchets. And another major advantage that the Europeans would bring with them are muskets. All right? This is a matchlock musket, and this musket would have been used by the Europeans, by the Pilgrims, to overcome Native American tribes that were nearby that might have been hostile to them. The gunpowder, which is another invention that the Europeans brought with them, originally invented by the Chinese. But this gunpowder would be used to ignite this musket. This is a matchlock musket. A little bit of powder would go in there. The rest of the powder would go down here in a ball, and then you would ram that down. The ignition source is actually a slow match, and that match would have been used to ignite the powder in the pan, causing the musket to fire. So these advantages are what helped the Pilgrims survive in the New World. So I'm here at Plymouth Rock in Plymouth, and so the story goes, this is the landmark the Pilgrims used, and they landed near here. So the story is a good one. I'm not quite sure if it's completely true, but there's a big monument built over it, so it's a big tourist attraction. Pretty cool though. So behind me is the replica of the Mayflower, called the Mayflower II. And it's a replica of the ship that brought the Pilgrims to Plymouth in 1620. So we're going to go on board and check it out. In the harbor of Plymouth, Massachusetts, an old-fashioned wooden ship called the Mayflower II floats beside a pier near Plymouth Rock. Every year, many thousands of people come aboard. They want to learn about the original Mayflower and the founding of Plymouth Colony in 1620. Plimouth Plantation has exhibited Mayflower II since 1957. Maritime artisans and other dedicated professionals work to keep the ship in her best sailing condition. In the past 10 years, they have had her out to sea under sail several times. Staff members appreciate Mayflower II as a unique time machine that enables them to get the feel of sea travel in colonial days. To understand more about ship design, construction, and the skills needed to sail in the 17th century, they study ongoing research in marine archaeology, colonial boat building, and woodworking. Just as important is understanding more about the seamen who sailed Mayflower and the passengers who traveled on it for 66 days on their way to an unfamiliar country. Plymouth Colony would have a great impact on the development of democracy in America. Before the Pilgrims started their new life, they had to solve some very practical problems. Their solution was to draft an agreement, later known as the Mayflower Compact. That became a first in consensual government and ensured everyone in the new colony would abide by the same laws. The Pilgrims would, quote, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politique. As part of this united body, they pledged to make and abide by the same laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices, in order to further the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In the Mayflower Compact, the Pilgrims were pledging their loyalty to laws they would make themselves. Plymouth Colony was the first experiment in consensual government in Western history between individuals with one another and not a monarch.
Oh